Hello folks, welcome to the canal de Channel Jose. Today we're going to show you, give you an idea how to replace the passenger side shock or strut on a 91 to 94 Toyota Tercel. And for this procedure, we're going to be lifting our car from both sides because our car has a sway bar. And if you have a sway bar, you don't want to leave one side on the ground because it's going to send pressure to the other side and you're going to have trouble trying to take the suspension apart on the other side. We're going to be putting the dust boot on our strut. We're going to be putting the insulator for the spring into the strut because our strut doesn't have that. So we're going to show you the procedure on that and how we remove the spring and switch it into this one. So one thing I want to say also, that this procedure applies for a 92 to 99 Toyota Paseo and 95 to 99 Toyota Tercel. But we're going to show you on the procedures why these components change. The procedure is about the same, but the components might change in a little bit in some small details. And we're going to show you throughout the video what we mean by that. And with that, let's get started. So just like always, folks, if you want to replace a component, you always want to verify what you got or what you bought is compatible with what you're taking off. So the part that you're going to put in has to be the same part that you're taking out. So don't want to be taking stuff apart and then find out that you open the box and then you have an item that don't fit on your car. Now you got to put everything back together so you can go to the other parts, exchange it for the right part, and then come back and then spend more time taking it apart. So first, if you know your components, look at it. If you know that is the right component, then you start taking components apart before you start actually going to the auto parts for a second trip. So before we start doing anything, what I would do is, what I recommend is that you loosen that nut about 4 or 5 threads off. So when you are actually taking it off outside the car, you don't work as much. And that nut, you know that is going to spin. So with we use an impact gun to loosen it. And then once we loosen it, then we start taking the rest apart. And this is the nut that we're talking about. This is the nut that keeps the strut tower, and then it keeps the spring encapsulated into the strut. So it does. If you take that nut off, the spring is gonna come out flying if you do it outside. This is the very important nut to be careful when you're taking it off. So we just loosen it to where it looks like this right there. So outside you don't work as hard. So now that we loosen that nut and we have it still threaded into the strut, what we can do is we can loosen and take off the bolt and the nut that are 12 millimeters. And we can leave this one and this one in there just to hold the weight of the strut into the car. So this one, we can just kind of loosen it, and this one, and these other two, we can take off. Usually this bolt is not on the tercels. I added it on and it's a 12 millimeter, but if it has it, you have to remove it to remove the strut from the tower of the frame. So now we took one nut and the bolt, 12 millimeter. We left these two, they're just loose. They're there just holding the weight of the strut. And now you leave that on while you work on these two 19 millimeter bolts and nuts and that 14 millimeter bolt that holds a brake line or brake hose into the strut. So we remove the brake line first, and then we work on these two to take them off. 19 millimeter socket and open wrench will be better for that. So now we just remove the brake hose bolt that holds it to the strut, so we can remove these two 19 millimeter bolts and nuts, and these are the only ones that secure the strut into the lower suspension. Once we loosen and take those out, we can go up and take the other two nuts from the suspension above, and so we can extract our strut. So we have loosened and we have taken out the bottom 19 millimeter bolt. So now this is the only bolt that is keeping that strut into the spindle. So once we take this one off, we can take off the upper two nuts, 12mm nuts, so that way we can extract our strut. So here's the old strut or the old shock that we're gonna be compressing to take the spring, everything out, and put the new one in. And then we're gonna put the insulator between the spring and the strut, and then the dust boot as well for the strut that doesn't have on the old one. So with that, we're gonna compress the spring with our tool. So now we have our strut on our tool to compress the spring, and then what this tool does is we compress this spring and keep the energy under control while we just take the strut tower off and the strut off, so we can put the new one and put it, assemble it, and then we can release the pressure and expand it inside the structure of the strut. So this what keeps pressure on this strut is the spring. That's why this nut on top is very, very important not to take it off if you don't have the spring compressed and under control. If you take that nut off, it's gonna be flying off and somebody's gonna get hurt. That's why this is very important. This step is to compress and keep that energy under control while you can take off that nut once the spring releases pressure from the strut. So we're going to show you what we mean by that. We compress the spring and then we take the nut from the strut tower to take everything apart. So now this is what we mean by controlling that energy from the spring. As you can see, the tension from the spring is being controlled and there's no pressure against the strut. So now the strut is actually just a shock by itself, and the energy on the spring is being compressed and controlled by our tool. So now we can take out the nut from the top, and then our strut will come out and the spring will be controlled in this tool, and then we can start sliding our new shock so we can put it together. So now, as we can see, we have the spring being compressed and controlled with our tool, and this is very critical step. So that's why you don't take that nut off from this strut if that spring is not compressed and under control. Otherwise, that nut will come out flying as a projectile. Somebody's gonna get hurt. So that's why these springs are very dangerous under pressure. You gotta respect these springs even on the tool. So here we have the old strut and the new strut. So we're gonna compress them both and show you that the old one is already needed to be replaced. So now we wanted to expose this one. The old one is stopping, is not performing as it should. So now we're gonna put the new one, and we're gonna put the new components into it and show you the process on how we put those on and how we put it together. Now we're gonna be adding our spring insulator against the strut, and this is very important because this can minimize the noise in the suspension. So this guy is just a rubber piece that goes right where the spring sits into the strut base, and then it's just a rubber piece. So this one fits from the 91 to 99 Toyota Tercel, and it fits the Paseo as well. So if you can find it for the 91 to 94 Toyota Tercel, look for it for 95 to 99 Toyota Tercel. So they fit to the Paseo in all the Terceles. So with that said, now this can minimize the noise as well. So now what we do is we drop the dust boot on. We put this sleeve on, and then the dust boot This is just a plastic, and we drop it in and we just leave it in there like this. And this is thanks to KYB. We got these, so we're gonna add it in. So now we can put the strut together. One thing I want to say, folks, is that your strut tower on the top has those grooves, so we gotta line those up with the strut rod. You see the low spots, you have to put it in and then match him, because if otherwise you put them different, if it sits right at one point and the nut is a little bit loose, you're gonna have a knocking on the suspension because that didn't sit right on the first. So you want to make sure you guide that as well. That's very important. That's where the 95 and 99 Toyota Tercel are different on these grooves, so they will match on the tower. The insulator on the bottom is as important on the top. If so, it doesn't have it on the top, you want to put it on, because that might cause some weird noises or squeaking while you're turning on your car. So these insulators are very important, as much as on the top and the bottom. So we put the bottom insulator for the spring, the dust boot. So we start feeding it through the bottom of the spring and start putting the top and start guiding it and put the nut and tightening it down. So now we have our strut complete. We have the new lower insulator, the dust boot, so we can start feeding it back into the car, so we can put all the suspension back as it was. So now the last thing we have to do is we put the bolt, 12mm bolt, the 12mm nut, and tighten them all, and that will finish the process. And we just verify that nut that is tight on the strut. And well, folks, this was an idea how to replace a passenger side shock or strut on a 91 to 94 Toyota Tercel. The 95 to 99 Toyota Tercel is about the same procedures. It's just that the strut changes on the grooves, that it locks itself into the tower, the upper piece. So with that said, the same procedures. And want to say one thing, that if your car has a sway bar or stabilizing bar that goes from one side to the other side, you want to put your car in jack stands on both sides, because if you got one tire on the ground and you're working in the other side and you got it on the air, the pressure from the other tire is going to give you problems on the other side of the suspension, because it's trying to compensate the weight of the car. So you're going to have trouble taking the components off. So that's why you want to lift your car and set it on jack stands both sides, so that pressure is relieved on that side of the stabilizing bar. Very important on that side. So the procedures are pretty much the same for the Paseo as well. The tools that we use is 19mm socket for the bottom bolts and nuts, 19mm socket for the upper piece on the strut. Be careful when you're compressing the spring, that's very dangerous. So you want to be doing it in a controlled environment when you're replacing the strut, if you're keeping the same spring. Another thing is that a 12mm socket is needed for this tower on top of the frame, and then the brake line or the brake hose requires a 14mm socket to take it off from the strut base, because it's attached to the strut. So that's why you gotta detach it, so you can pull off the strut off without breaking the brake line. So with that said, hopefully this video gives you an idea or more understanding on how you can work on your car and save money, and at the same time start knowing your car better. Hopefully this is helpful. So for those folks who are watching our video and haven't subscribed to our channel, please subscribe. If you like our video, give us thumbs up, share it, and we'll see you soon with more videos here en el canal El Chano Jose.